Hi, thank you for having me here today. I feel very privileged and it's an honour to share my practice with you all. Okay, Algorithmic Omens. I want to start by sharing the most jarring algorithmic omen I have ever received. It arrived unannounced, unsolicited, and very shortly after I was diagnosed with a rare muscle disease. A white coffin, a funeral home ad, appeared while I was listening to a podcast on SoundCloud. And it did what an omen does. 1 second, I was in ordinary online life, and the next, I was in an abrupt confrontation with mortality. And the fact that my diagnosis had now become a market category. Is this an industrialised memento mori? The coffin ad came from patterns, cold correlations, designed for profit, not care. So here is the ontological split I want you all to feel. Two uncertain futures side by side. One is medical uncertainty, accountable to standards of evidence. The other is algorithmic guesswork, accountable to engagement and conversion. To understand why that landed like an omen, I need to rewind. Algorithmic omens weave through our lives, not as fate or magic, but as ruptures in the digital dialogue that seeks to guide and provoke our actions. To me, the body in flux reflects my personal experience of constant change, sometimes swift, sometimes slow, and often unexpected. My mobility changes day to day. Sometimes I need a wheelchair, sometimes a rollator, and sometimes neither. In my early 20s, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I remember seeing my brain MRI for the first time, confronted not only by the image, but rupture in self-perception. There was my brain, yet not myself. Imperfections of lesions and the impersonal taxonomy of Latin. And I understand that medicine, by necessity, must divide and categorise the body to be able to build knowledge. But in that act of naming, something is split. The body as object, the self as subject. The clinical gaze renders me fragmented, a constellation of findings, even as my inner body persists as a whole. Then in 2023, I was diagnosed again, this time with a rare muscle disease. So I was already very overwhelmed by the unknowns, survival rates, rapidly shifting mobility of my body, can I still work, the mental weight of uncertain future. I thought I'd be ready for this. After all, I had already experienced something similar, but I wasn't ready, not just because of the diagnosis itself, that of course was confronting and had its own challenges, because the world around it had changed too. Between those two moments, the medicalised body left the clinic and the private realm and moved into the feed. I rely on social media, like many, to stay connected, which means I'm also being read by ad systems, platforms, and recommendation engines. Suddenly, I wasn't only encountering my own body as medicalised data in a hospital or in a dusty folder I keep on my bookshelf. I was encountering it as inference, as targeting, as a pattern being acted on in real time. The recent diagnosis began my investigation into the medicalised body in the age of AI, which led me to an art and science program in Austria with Ars Electronica, where I collaborated with a data scientist on an AI-driven N=1 study, essentially a study focusing on a single subject, my body. So predictive health analytics usually relies on huge, large data sets for comparison. A single case, what is called N=1, is often dismissed in science because it can't be generalised. But for this project, focusing on just one body was the point. So we set out to examine a question at the heart of wellness technology and the promise of personalisation. that it sells is all. Do algorithms care, and not in a sentimental way, but can an algorithm adapt to and predict outcomes for one body, a single body, with all its messy fluctuations, without forcing it to conform to normative health metrics and data sets? My artistic question was a little bit more pointed. Can the quantified self serve the ill body? So, there we are, sorry. We explored how real-time monitoring might be used without surrendering intimate data to large platforms for comparison. In the end, the project did not deliver the individualised illusion that wellness apps and wearables sell. It proved that a living body is too variable and unpredictable to be treated as standardised training data. So the moment you try and make that data clean, you flatten lived experience into categories: compliant or non-compliant, improving or declining, optimisable or risky. But the research failure was very insightful. It made the underlying logic of these machine learning systems visible. It showed how easily large-scale machine learning models can appear certain, while their real decision-making is in the thresholds, the classifications. What counts as truth stays hidden. This extraction of my data for the AI study did not render it knowable or legible to machines. Rather, it alienated me further from my digital doppelganger and my lived experience. So when I came back from Austria, I created the installation Stealth Care Wellness from the Algorithm as a sense-making of the research experience. The work invited audiences into a hybrid spa and sterile clinical setting where healthcare and capitalist wellness industry blur. I translated my muscle data into sound, not as optimization, but as a glitch in the wellness promise. I also presented it as a therapy in the form of auditory conversion beamed into jelly. Because for me, wellness, the future of wellness apps and wearables and the emergence of new technology therapies are just as absurd. This separation I once felt in the clinic now reappears online as a perfectly timed ad. In my study, I saw how private experience becomes opportunity for extraction. Now, clinical categories are replaced by digital signs of improvement or decline. In older divination practices, an omen is a sign that lands on the body. I use omen deliberately here because its syntax is situated and bodily, a sign that arrives good or bad for the body, whether felt collectively for a community or privately for an individual. We all know that feeling, an ad on a digital platform that seems to know us better than we know ourselves. It appears to read our minds, anticipate our choices, and even gesture towards our fate. And yet it can be terribly wrong, just as past omens have always been unreliable times and shrouded in absurdity. Omens and algorithmic predictions don't explain. They steer, assembling a near future from fragments. So cultural inheritance of omen seeking gets mechanized and then monetized. But I'm interested in what changes when the logic of code replaces the search for meaning. These systems do not simply read bodies, they generate trajectories. Some are lured by the promise of optimization, others are sorted into maintenance, left behind by the very pathways that promise ascent. That sorting is both opaque and intimate. You feel it, even when you cannot name it. Tanya Buscher calls this the way algorithmic systems are sensed as atmosphere. Something lived, not fully understood, but acting on you all the same. Not because it cared, but because it profiled. And this is the logic of the ad economy. Signals become segments, segments become revenue. When a body in flux is searching, moving through clinics or not leaving the house as much, step counts are dropping, anxious clicks, late night symptom searching, that uncertainty, that vulnerability is rendered legible as a market category. Suddenly, my body is no longer my own, no longer private. It's a profile, a trajectory, a consumer future. Now, I want to be careful here. My specialist prognosis was a little daunting, but it was grounded in clinical expertise, evidence, and a relationship. It came with context, nuance, and the possibility of treatments and questions. In older Western forms of divination, omens were never interpreted as in a vacuum. A bird, a change of wind, a flash of lightning. These were read through the situation, season, landscape, shared story, and the people who were present. Meaning was negotiated. It was social. It had witnesses. The algorithmic omen arrives in private, one-to-one, me in the feed, no witnesses in the old ritual sense, no shared reading, no one to hold the story, no agreed way to interpret what just happened, just cold delivery. And what is being delivered isn't understanding, it's a nudge. As Elena Esposito argues, contemporary algorithmic predictions do not need to explain to be powerful. They project forward from patterns of the present, producing a near future that is basically an extension of right now, actionable, clickable, and profitable. When algorithmic systems are opaque and infrastructurally distant, accountability becomes difficult to locate. But it still rests with the organisation that build them, deploy them, and profit from them. Stripped of story, ritual, and lived experience, these signals can land bluntly, sometimes helpful, sometimes intrusive, and regularly very wrong. And yet, even when they are wrong, they still do something. They fracture attention and they reroute the self. That fracture, that sudden break in meaning, is the moment I'm trying to name here. Algorithmic systems intervene in personal life, sometimes in ways that feel intimate and sometimes in ways that are invasive. The data point becomes the bird, the feed becomes the sky, and the advert becomes the reading. The coffin wasn't my only omen. I have received many. All of these are advertisings I have received over the last few years. But after the coffin, the prophecy started to widen. And here I'll show you 4 fertility ads. 1, give the gift of kindness, donate your eggs. 2, give the gift of kindness, donate your eggs to this lovely couple. 3, monitor your fertility just in case. 4, freeze your eggs just in case. And what's missing completely is context. There's no recognition of medical reality. Can this person even carry a pregnancy? Can they even donate eggs? There's no recognition of desire. Do they even want a baby? None of that matters to the system because I am of childbearing age with an uncertain health future, a body in flux, therefore sellable, therefore extractable. And what I'm trying to name here is the violence and rupture of that intimacy, the way it can preempt your own thinking, the way it can place you into a trajectory before you've even had a chance to decide what anything means. After confronting my own algorithmic predictions and collecting an extensive amount of personal data in the N=1 study, I created this filmic performance, Latency and Lacerations, and explored the divide between my lived body and my extracted data. I followed the route of the undersea fibre optic cable from the data centre to the shoreline on Kabi Kabi country, Maroochydore, Sunshine Coast. The work examines the tension between seamless digital systems, like submarine cables, and the unpredictable realities of our physical bodies, asking what happens when the virtual cloud meets the tangible coastline and touches the body. And this is where verticality comes in. Just as ancient augurs read the sky with height and ascent, marking proximity to power, sorry, that's a bit loud. Contemporary systems read unseen signals and produce their own vertical order. Because a body in flux doesn't just move in one direction. Sometimes the feed resurrects you. One week it offers handrails, home modifications, wheelchairs, and products of managed decline. Then it is optimization again. Maybe you went to a hydrotherapy session at the local pool, an organic cafe, or to the beach with a friend. The digital traces signify strength, performance, recovery, a comeback, overcoming, and ascent. Not because you've been healed, but because the signals have shifted. The feed doesn't diagnose, it reclassifies. So you get this strange kind of ad segment resurrection, an algorithmic rebirth, and it's just as uncanny as the fall. So the omen doesn't come once. It comes in cycles.
3 weeks ago,
Thinkers like Stephen Graham and Benjamin Bratton give us language for the verticality of contemporary power, a stratification that runs through infrastructure, surveillance, and governance. What Graham calls vertical geopolitics names the power organised by altitude, by who gets lifted, who gets surveyed from above, and who is left below. Bratton gives a technical version of the same story, the stack as a layered system that sorts, ranks, and governs. If you want a mythic mirror, Maciej Eliade describes the axis mundi as the line between heaven and earth, centre and margin, peak and valley. Today, that axis is not a maypole or a tree or a mountain. It could be viewed as a skyscraper, a digital stack. Private space colonisation imaginaries, for example, a ranking, a feed. And this is where the omen language returns, because omens do not arrive as neutral signals. They arrive already weighted, auspicious or sinister, inscribing value into the flow of information. That coffin ad was my comet, a disruption that reclassified me in an instant. If we pull back from this verticality, it becomes clear it's not only technical, but aesthetic, a visual regime that shapes what can be seen and what can be known. In Fascinating Fascism, Susan Sontag observes that fascist aesthetics don't just admire strength, they eroticize it. The ideal body, the upright body, is disciplined and rising. Now that hinge is what I want to use here, not to say that digital wellness is fascist, but to say it borrows a familiar aesthetic logic, the fantasy of the perfected, strong body, the upright body, the body that ascends, and the quiet contempt for bodies that don't. Algorithmic wellness culture also echoes that logic on its own contemporary way. It rewards bodies that perform optimization, self-control, productivity, relentless improvement, and makes other bodies less visible, less legible, less worthy of investing in. The feed becomes a kind of vertical elevator. Some profiles rise into light and encouragement, and others sink into obscurity, risk, and managed decline products. So when I talk about verticality here, I'm not being poetic, I'm describing a structure, an aesthetic, and an infrastructure that keeps asking the same question: who ascends and who stays in the valley? This verticality doesn't only play out in the language of ascent and descent, it lives in the hardware, in the racks, in the data centres, and in the way our digital selves are physically housed, organised, and processed. Think about the server racks, the density, the sheer heat, the power it takes to keep the algorithmic omen alive. These are the infrastructures that classify us, optimise, risky, or profitable. They hold the fantasy that a body can be reduced to signals and be managed accordingly. And the consequences don't just stay in the building. So when I talk about algorithmic health and wellness, I don't just mean apps and wearables. I mean an economy that treats vulnerability as an opportunity, where commerce and care blur so thoroughly it's impossible to distinguish which voice is addressing you. The stack is built on an old idea of a central column, linking heaven and earth, the sacred and the ordinary. It's a vertical line of knowledge and power. It transcends and it descends. The data centre is on a horizontal plane. There is no cloud, yet its logic relies on verticality, and it is not neutral. A server rack or a data centre starts to look like the cathedral of our time, of our era, a church built on blinking lights and cooling systems, a belief system that you don't have to consent to in order to be shaped by it. And there's a line from Ian Bogo's article in The Atlantic I keep returning to because it's such a clean test. He suggests try swapping the word algorithm with the word God in almost any sentence and see if the meaning really changes. So trust the algorithm. The algorithm knows you. The algorithm has a plan for you. The algorithm gave me this product, and suddenly you can feel it, not as a metaphor, but as a description of how power is currently being staged, vertically, mystically, invisible, and within the aesthetics of inevitability. Cryptechnoscience offers a different starting point, not as optimization, not as scale, not as fantasy of clean data sets, but situated, resistant, and non-normative bodies as sites of knowledge. My own projects, like latency and lacerations, even the failed N=1 study I conducted with the data scientists, sit within this frame. The study failed to produce reliable predictive care model from a single fluctuating body, and that failure is the precise insight. It shows where systems expect stability, repeatability, and population norms, and where lived bodies refuse them. In that sense, cryptechnoscience is not about making the disabled or ill bodies more machine-readable. It's about making machine systems more accountable to bodily variations, frictions and limits, the messiness of being a human. It looks for meaning not to smooth out predictions, but to break it down, mismatch and refusal. If the data center is the vertical stack where the datafied body is processed, sorted and valued, then most of that power operates out of sight. The infrastructure is materially real, but perceptually absent. So how do we relocate that invisible infrastructure into a shared perception? How do we make classification spatial, sensory, and confrontable? One strategy is not to explain the system, but stage it. To move it from abstraction into the encounter, delay, inference, friction, and misfire. To translate profiling into spatial experience, prediction into sound, classification into atmosphere. Not as an illustration, but as a confrontation. Rupture here is sabotage. It's a semiotic interruption, a break in the smooth story the system tells about efficiency, care, and inevitability. A moment where the audience can see what appears as neutral prediction is built from thresholds, models, exclusions, and economic priorities. Cryptechnoscience does not ask what is to be included in the system, does not ask to be included into the system as is. It asks what the system looks like when viewed from bodies it cannot easily stabilise. Thanks.